The small trading post was dark and full of shadows. It smelled like old metal, burnt wires, and fear. The man walked in slowly, wearing a long coat that touched the floor. No one looked at him, and he liked it that way. He was a traveler, a scavenger, a man who had seen too much of the galaxy, but nothing had prepared him for what he found in the farthest corner of that post. It was a cage, hidden behind old boxes and broken parts. The cage was no bigger than a dog crate, made of cold metal bars. Inside, something moved, very slowly, almost like it was afraid to be seen. He crouched down and used a small flashlight. The light touched a tiny form, curled up, arms around her knees. She was an alien, small, like a child. But her eyes were old. Her body was thin, covered in scratches and bruises. Her skin was a pale blue, her hair a mess of silver threads, and her eyes. Those glowing violet eyes looked at him like he was another monster. A sign on the cage read, "Unusable, too aggressive, not for sale." The man frowned. Why keep her if she's not for sale? He whispered to himself. The shopkeeper walked by and laughed. That thing. Useless, dangerous, bites like a beast. But you didn't kill her, the man said quietly. Some buyers want experiments. Others like to bet on cage fights. The shopkeeper shrugged. She's too small for that, the man said. Still staring into those eyes, she was bred for war. Some lab-grown thing from the outer sectors? A failed batch, the shopkeeper added, walking off. The man looked at her again. How long have you been in there? She didn't speak, only stared, breathing fast. He moved slowly, opening a pocket and pulling out a protein bar. He unwrapped it and placed it just outside the cage. She didn't move, didn't blink, only watched. Then he did something strange, something no one had done for her before. He reached out his hand, softly, slowly, and placed it on one of the metal bars. She flinched, but didn't growl. His hand stayed there, warm and still. Minutes passed, finally, with trembling fingers. She moved closer. Her hand, tiny and shaking, reached out and touched his. The second their skin met, she shook. Not like someone cold, but like someone trying not to cry. She had never been touched like this. Not with care, not with gentleness. Her body didn't know how to handle kindness. He didn't speak, didn't smile. Just let her hold his fingers. Other buyers laughed behind him. Are you trying to pet a bomb? Someone joked, but the man ignored them. In that small, quiet moment, nothing else mattered. He stood up and walked back to the front. How much for the cage? He asked the shopkeeper. I told you, she's not for everything has a price, the man said, placing a credit chip on the table. It was enough to buy a shuttle, maybe two. The shopkeeper stared at it, then laughed. Your funeral? And tossed him the cage key. He went back to the corner, unlocked the cage, and gently opened the door. The girl didn't move. She just stared, her eyes confused, afraid, and full of something close to hope. He crouched down again. You're free, he whispered. But you can come with me if you want. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She looked at the open door, then at him. Slowly, she crawled out. Step by step, she didn't stand. Just stayed low, like she was still expecting pain. He took off his coat and wrapped it around her gently. She shook again, holding the coat tight like it was a shield. They left the trading post in silence. No one stopped them. No one cared. But as they walked into the cold desert night, she looked up at the stars. Then at the man beside her, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a weapon. She felt like someone. The touch had changed everything. The night was quiet, but not peaceful. The man and the tiny alien girl walked slowly through the dark canyon. The stars above blinked like cold eyes, and the ground was rough with old stone and sand. She held his coat tight around her, still walking low like an animal. Always ready to run, he didn't rush her, didn't say much, just kept close and steady. Every few steps, she would glance at him, unsure, as if expecting him to disappear. They found shelter in a broken cargo pod resting against a cliff wall. The inside smelled like rust and oil, but it was better than open air. The man broke a protein bar in half and handed her a piece. This time, she took it without shaking. She didn't say thank you, but her eyes stayed on him the whole time. As the wind picked up outside, she curled up in the far corner. He laid down on the cold metal floor, using his bag as a pillow. He didn't ask questions, didn't try to touch her again. He just said one thing before closing his eyes. "You're safe now." Hours passed. The cold grew stronger. She couldn't sleep, her body alert to every sound, every breath. But finally, her small body moved closer to his warmth. She didn't touch him, not yet, just stayed near, like a shadow that wanted to be more. Suddenly, a loud sound echoed across the canyon. An alarm, far away but getting closer. She jumped up, eyes wide, muscles tense. The man opened his eyes, sat up, and listened. Red lights flashed and the sky searched drones. "They're tracking," he said calmly. She backed away, hands clenched into tiny fists. He pulled his coat tighter around her and said, "We need to move." They ran, not fast, but steady. She was faster, even with her small legs. She moved like wind between rocks, but she kept stopping to make sure he was behind her. That small act said more than words ever could. They found another path, leading through sharp cliffs and tunnels. The sky behind them burned red as ships landed at the post they had left. Whoever owned her didn't want her free. She wasn't just a weapon, she was property, and now she was stolen. The man knew this wasn't just about escape anymore. This was a hunt, and they were the prey. As night turned to early dawn, they hid in a cave behind a waterfall. Water dripped steadily, and the air was cold and wet. He checked his scanner. No signals nearby. They had a little time. The girl sat across from him, watching every move he made. He pulled a cloth from his bag and cleaned a cut on her leg. She winced, but didn't pull away. Then she whispered something for the first time. "Since the cage, why help me?" Her voice was dry, broken like old glass. He looked at her and said, "Because someone should have." She stared at him, confused, then whispered, "They always say I break things." The man smiled gently. "Maybe it's time you learn to build something." Suddenly, there was a sound, metal clinking against rock. The girl stood instantly, a small blade in her hand, taken from the cave wall. He stood beside her, blaster ready. Figures moved in the mist outside, slow and heavy. These weren't soldiers, they were trackers, armored and silent, trained to take things alive. The girl didn't wait. She dashed forward with silent speed. She hit the first tracker low, knocking him off balance. The second grabbed her arm butt before he could twist. The man fired. One shot to the shoulder, not to kill, but to stop. They ran again. Deeper into the cave system, twisting tunnels, old mining paths, collapsing walls. She led the way this time, her body remembering places even if her mind didn't. At last, they reached a broken shaft where light came through the cracks. She stopped, breathing hard, and looked back. "I slowed you down," she said quietly. The man shook his head. "You gave me a reason to run." She blinked fast, like the words hit something deep inside her. Then, with shaking hands, she reached out and touched his arm. A soft, unsure touch, not to defend, not to attack, just to connect. The chase wasn't over. But in that moment, she realized something. She wasn't just running from someone. She was running toward something, and that something was him. The cave was quiet again, only the soft drip of water echoing through the stone. The man built a small fire using old mining wood. just enough to bring light. The girl sat across from him, her back against the wall, her knees pulled close. She didn't speak much, but her eyes followed every move he made. Not like a student watching a teacher, but like a weapon scanning its target. The warmth of the fire didn't seem to reach her. She kept her arms wrapped around herself, always ready to move, always ready to fight. He laid down a piece of cloth beside the fire and pushed some food toward her. She picked it up slowly, sniffed it, then ate fast like someone who had learned. To survive without manners, she didn't say thank you, didn't smile. But her eyes didn't hold the same cold wall they used to. Something small was changing. The man leaned back and watched her. He didn't ask questions, not yet, but he saw the truth written in her movements. She had been trained, not raised, built for speed, silence, survival, but not for love, not for rest, not for trust. He spoke gently. You move like a soldier. She froze, then nodded once. I was made to be one, she said softly. The words hung in the air. Heavy and sharp, he asked nothing more, and she said no more, that night. He woke to a strange sound, quick breaths, soft grunts, and the rustle of feet. He looked over and saw her near the entrance of the cave. She was training, barefoot on cold rock, punching the air, kicking with perfect form. Her movements were fast, controlled, almost beautiful, but her face showed no peace, only pain, only habit. He stood up slowly and walked toward her. You don't have to do that anymore, he said quietly. She stopped, chest rising and falling fast. This is all I know, she whispered. Not looking at him. If I don't train, I forget who I am. He shook his head. You're more than fists and speed. She turned to him, eyes wide, confused. No one ever said that. I just did, he replied. She dropped her arms, her whole body suddenly looking small again. He stepped closer and opened the blanket he was holding. Without a word, he wrapped it around her shoulders. She didn't move, didn't pull away, just stood there, still breathing hard. And then, softly, she asked, why do you treat me like I'm not a thing? He didn't answer right away. He just looked into her tired eyes and said, because you're not? The next morning, they started walking again. They followed old tunnels and broken roads, heading toward the outer colonies. Sometimes they talked, but mostly they walked in silence, a soft silence, not an empty one. At one point, they reached a small stream. The man knelt to drink, and when he looked up, she was gone. Panic hit him for a moment, till he saw her. She was standing in a field of broken glass, near an old training post, staring at something. He walked over slowly. There, in the dirt, was a cracked mirror, still shining. She was staring at her reflection like she didn't recognize herself. Her hands touched her face, her hair, her own glowing eyes. I was never allowed to look before, she whispered. They said mirrors make soldiers soft. He knelt beside her. You're not just a soldier. She looked at him, pain in her voice. Then what am I? He thought for a moment, then said, you're someone who can choose now. That night, they made camp near a burned-out ship. She sat by the fire and watched it dance, her arms no longer crossed. The man offered her a small knife, not as a weapon, but as a gift. She took it, holding it carefully, then placed it beside her as she sat. It was the first time she didn't hold something like it was part of her body. She was learning what it meant to let go. Before sleeping, she whispered something that made the man's chest tighten. Thank you for not using me. He didn't know how to reply, so he just reached over, touched her shoulder gently, and said, sleep well, warrior. She didn't flinch this time. She only nodded and closed her eyes. And for the first time in her life, she fell asleep without fear, not as a weapon, but as a girl. They followed the path of broken lights and old wires. The man led with quiet steps, the tiny alien girl just behind. Her feet were silent, but her eyes were wide, always watching. Always learning. Days had passed since they left the old caves. And now they moved through old ruins of war, destroyed outposts, forgotten machines. Rusted bones of dead armies. The girl walked like a shadow, never complaining, never asking, but her hands were no longer always clenched. Sometimes she would touch a leaf, a stone, or even the man's sleeve. Small touches, curious, gentle. Like she was discovering the world for the first time, one evening. They stopped near the remains of a human supply depot. It was half buried in dust, but still had working solar panels. The man fixed the generator and warmed a small cabin. She sat by the window, staring at the dark sky where two moons drifted like cold eyes. He placed a warm meal in front of her. She didn't touch it at first. Just watched the steam rise, then slowly picked up the spoon and ate, careful and quiet. The man smiled. "You're getting used to real food." She didn't respond. Only nodded once. Later that night, he sat across from her, cleaning his tools. She sat cross-legged, eyes following the motion of his hands. Then she said something, just one word, soft like a breeze. "Why?" The word hung in the air like a whisper inside a storm. He looked up, surprised. She looked nervous, unsure if she had done something wrong. "Why what?" He asked gently. She pointed at herself, then at him. "Why you touch? Like I'm precious." Her voice cracked as she spoke, like it hadn't been used in years. He put the tools down and sat still. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned forward and spoke slowly. "Because you are." She blinked fast, her breathing uneven. Her lips moved like she was about to speak again, but no sound came. Her hands trembled, not from cold, but from something deep. Like her heart didn't know how to hold what he had. Just said, then her eyes filled with tears. She didn't cry loud, didn't sob. Tears just ran down her cheeks quietly, like rain on old stone. The man didn't move closer. Didn't speak again. He just sat with her, letting her feel it. She had been trained to fight, to kill, to follow orders. But she had never been trained for this, for kindness, for gentleness, for love. Her tears were not weakness. They were healing. Later that night, she stood by the fire, looking at the stars. He joined her, silent. She finally whispered again. They said, crying is failure. He shook his head. Crying means you're still human inside. I'm not human, she said, voice shaking. You don't need to be human to matter, he said softly. She looked at her hands, small and scarred. I was made to be a tool. No, he replied. You were made, yes, but now you live. She slowly reached for his hand. Not out of fear, not out of habit, but because she wanted to. And when he held her hand back, she didn't shake. She just breathed, deep and steady. They stayed like that under the sky, hand in hand. No more cages. No more commands. Just two souls walking away from war and into something new in the morning. When they packed up to leave, she said another word, soft but clear. Thank you. He looked at her and smiled. You're welcome, little star. She blinked. Little star. It suits you, he said. You're small, but you shine through the dark. She touched her chest lightly, as if holding the name inside, then nodded. Okay. I like it. For the first time, she smiled. Not big, not bright, but real. And the man knew, in that simple smile, that she was no longer just surviving. She was becoming. The path ahead was quiet, but the man could feel the weight in the air. He had traveled long enough to sense when something was about to go wrong. Beside him, the tiny alien girl now called Little Star walked with soft steps. She still didn't speak much, but her eyes were brighter, more alive. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was learning to live. They crossed an old bridge made of steel, rusted and bent. Below it, water moved slowly, carrying bits of trash and broken metal. A small bird-like creature landed nearby, and Little Star watched it closely. When it flew away, she smiled slightly. The man saw that smile and felt proud, but the moment didn't last. A sudden high-pitched sound filled the air like a whistle from the sky. He looked up, and his heart dropped. 3 small drones circled above them. "Red lights blinking. Get down," he said quickly, pulling her under the bridge. She obeyed, silent but alert, her body tight like a coiled spring. The drones scanned the area, then flew back toward the west. "They found us," he whispered. She nodded, no fear in her eyes, only focus. They moved fast after that. Cutting through hills and ruined towns, Little Star followed him closely. Always watching, always ready, she never asked questions. But she understood the danger. Whoever sent the drones wasn't going to give up. That night, they camped in an abandoned house built into a cliff. The walls were cracked, but the roof held. He set alarms around the area using old wires and scrap metal. Little Star sat by the window, staring out into the dark. Her knife rested on her lap, her hand always near it. "When they come," she said quietly, "I will fight." He turned. To her, shaking his head, "You don't have to fight alone anymore." She looked at him, confused. "I was made for this." "No," he said gently. "You were made to survive, but now you have a choice." She didn't answer, but her eyes lowered. She didn't want to fight. Not really. But she didn't know how not to. At dawn, the alarms went off. A soft buzz, then a sudden crack. He jumped up, blaster in hand. Little Star was already moving, fast and silent. Outside, 2 figures approach, tall, armored, moving like shadows. Trackers, they didn't speak, didn't hesitate. They moved straight toward the house like they had done it 100 times before. He fired the first shot, hitting one in the chest, but the armor held. Little Star leaped from the window, landing on the second tracker's back. She stabbed once, twice, fast and deep. The tracker stumbled, falling to one knee. "Run!" The man shouted, but she didn't listen. She moved like lightning, taking down the second tracker with brutal grace, but more were coming, shapes in the distance, lights blinking through the trees. He grabbed her arm. "We can't stay." They ran together, cutting through the back of the house into the woods. Blaster fire followed them, burning the air around their heads. She darted between trees, using every rock and branch as cover. He followed, slower, but steady. They reached a ridge where the forest dropped into a wide crater. He stopped, breathing hard. "We'll make a stand here." She turned to him, eyes wide. "No, they'll kill you." "Not if we stop them first," he said, loading his last power cell. She hesitated, then stepped forward. "If I go back, they stop hunting." He stared at her, heart pounding. "You think I brought you this far just to give you back?" Tears formed in her eyes. "I don't want you to die for me." "I'm not dying," he said firmly. "I'm protecting what matters." Her lips trembled. No one had ever said she mattered. She looked at him, really looked, and whispered, "Then I fight with you." Together, they set traps. Old mines buried under leaves. Wires stretched across trees. They waited in the shadows. Silent hearts beating in sync. And when the hunters came, the forest exploded with fire and smoke. Little Star moved like she was born from the wind. Every strike was fast, but now her moves came from choice, not program. She wasn't just defending herself, she was protecting him. The fight was fierce, but the trackers weren't ready for them. One by one, they fell, caught in traps or hit by blaster fire. And when it was over, she stood in the smoke, blood on her hands. But this time, she didn't feel like a weapon. She felt like someone who had saved a life. He walked up to her, bruised and bleeding. She touched his face gently and whispered, "You are mine to protect now." He nodded, holding her close, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she belonged. Asterisk the smoke drifted through the quiet trees. Broken branches, scorched earth, and silence were all that remained. Little Star stood still, her chest rising and falling fast. She was covered in cuts and dirt, her blade still in her hand, but her eyes were clear. Focused, not wild like before. This time, she had chosen the fight. And it had meant something. The man limped toward her, one arm pressed to his side. A burn mark stretched across his ribs, but he smiled through the pain. "We did it," he said softly. She looked at him, blinking slowly. "Yes," she whispered. "We did." They didn't celebrate. They didn't rest yet. They both knew this was only a small wave. If these trackers had found them, more would come. Stronger, faster, deadlier, that night. They stayed in a half-buried cargo pod, deep in the forest. The man wrapped his wound with cloth, sitting against the cold wall. Little Star sat beside him, quiet, thinking. The fire crackled between them, throwing soft light on her face. "I was made for war," she said suddenly. "But now, I fight for something else." He turned to her, surprised. She touched her own chest, right over her heart. "For you," she whispered. "And for me?" He didn't speak. He just reached out and placed his hand on hers. She didn't flinch, didn't shake. She just let it stay, warm and steady. But peace didn't last long. The ground trembled in the early morning, a low hum rolling through the earth. He stood quickly, grabbing his scanner. Little Star already had her knife drawn. A ship, black and wide, flew over the treetops. It wasn't a drone. It wasn't a patrol. It was the Collector, the main ship that gathered runaways, escaped weapons, and broken assets. It was the last step before destruction. "It's here for you," he said, eyes scanning the sky. "No," she replied, her voice steady. "It's here for us." They ran, cutting through dense woods, dodging fallen trunks and deep pits. The Collector ship moved fast, scanning the ground with red beams. And then it landed. Metal feet slammed into the ground, shaking everything. The door opened, and out came 3 elite trackers, taller, colder, built like machines. Behind them, a commander stepped down, face hidden by a chrome mask. He raised a hand, and his voice rang out. "Asset 09. Return now, or your handler dies." Little Star froze. The word handler hit her like a weapon. She looked at the man beside her. "You're not my handler," she said quietly. He shook his head. "I'm your friend." She looked up at him, eyes glowing softly. "Then I'll end this." Before he could stop her, she stepped forward, not to surrender, but to fight. She charged, her body low, her blade tight in hand. The trackers moved in, but she was faster, her mind clear, her steps silent. She used the trees, the shadows, the memories of training, but now, with purpose, she fought not to survive, but to protect. The first tracker fell with a quick slice to the neck. The second fired, but she spun away, striking low and fast. The third caught her arm and slammed her down, but she twisted and kicked. She moved like a storm, controlled and wild all at once. But the commander wasn't just watching. Oh, he stepped forward and pulled a strange weapon from his back. It hummed with dark energy. "A menu. You were never meant to think," he said. "Only obey." She stood tall, her chest rising, her eyes fierce. "I am not your tool." She shouted. She charged him, fast and fearless. They fought, her speed against his power, her heart against his control. The man watched from the tree line, blood still dripping from his side. He wanted to run to her, to help, but he knew this was her fight, a final test of everything she had become. The commander hit her hard, knocking her into the dirt. He raised the weapon high, but before he could strike, she rolled forward, grabbed a sharp rock, and drove it into his leg. He screamed. Falling back, she jumped on him, blade in hand, and held it to his throat. He froze. She could end him right there. But instead, she looked him in the eye and said, "I choose who I am now." She stood up, stepped back, and turned away. The man ran to her. Arms open, she fell into him, shaking, breathless. "You did it," he whispered. She didn't speak, just held him tight. The commander lay on the ground, defeated, not dead, but broken. His ship powered down and the remaining trackers dragged him back inside. The ship lifted into the sky and vanished. Little Star looked up at the sky, tears in her eyes. "I am free," she whispered. And for the first time, she believed it. The forest slowly returned to silence. The wind moved gently through the trees, brushing leaves like soft hands. Little Star stood beside the man, her small hand holding his tightly. Her body still shook from the fight, but her heart felt light. The sky above them was wide and open. No ships, no red lights, no more fear. They walked slowly now. No need to run, no more hiding. He limped a little, still hurt, but her arms stayed around his waist. She supported him with surprising strength. Even though she barely reached his shoulder, they didn't speak much, but the quiet between them was no longer empty. It was full of understanding, full of trust, full of something that felt like peace. 2 days later, they reached the edge of a human colony. It was small, hidden inside tall cliffs, with solar towers and gardens built into stone. The gates opened when they saw him, and a few guards walked forward, their weapons lowered as they recognized the man. He had helped this place before, years ago. But then they saw Little Star. The guards stiffened, hands moving toward their belts. Her eyes narrowed, her body tensed, ready to fight again. But the man stepped in front of her, raising one hand. "She's with me," he said calmly. "She's not a threat." One of the guards frowned. "She's one of them, she's not." The man replied, "She's someone." Little Star lowered her eyes, afraid they would send her away. But no one did. They let them pass, unsure but respectful. Inside the colony, people stared. Children peeked from behind buildings, whispering. Some adults turned their backs. Others just watched with cold eyes. Little Star stayed close to the man, her fingers gripping his sleeve like a lifeline. They were given a small room near the far end of the colony. It was quiet, with a bed, a table, and a view of the cliffs. She stood in the middle, staring at everything like it was from a dream. "This is your room too," the man said. Placing his bag on the floor, she looked at him. "Confused, you mean? I can stay." "Of course," he replied. "You're home now." She sat on the bed slowly, hands flat on the blanket. It was soft, warm, safe. She had never had a bed before. Just cold floors, sharp corners, and empty cages. That night, the man fell asleep. Quickly, tired from travel and wounds, Little Star stayed awake, watching him from her place near the window. She didn't understand this feeling in her chest. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't pain. It was something warm, something soft. She whispered a word she had never used before. Safe. The next morning, a child stood outside their door, holding a toy. The child was small, human, and curious. Little Star opened the door slowly. The child didn't run, didn't cry. Instead, they held out the toy, a small stuffed animal. Little Star looked at it, unsure what to do. The child smiled and said, "It's for you." She took the toy gently, her hands shaking. "Thank you," she whispered. The child ran off, laughing. She stood there in the doorway, holding the soft toy to her chest. That afternoon, the man taught her how to cook a simple meal. She was clumsy at first, spilling things and burning her fingers. But she laughed, a real soft laugh that made his chest feel warm. He had never heard her laugh before. Each day, she learned more. How to speak with kindness, how to walk without fear, how to touch without flinching, how to sleep without waking from nightmares. One evening, as the sun turned the cliffs orange and gold, She sat beside the man on a bench outside their room. She leaned her head against his arm. "I'm not a weapon," she said quietly. He nodded. "No, you're not. I'm not just a soldier." "No," he replied. "Your family." Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they didn't hurt. They healed. She smiled. Soft and shining. "I never knew I could feel this. You earned it," he said. "You chose to be more." That night, she curled up in the bed beside him, not out of fear, but comfort. Her small body relaxed, her breathing slow. And just before falling asleep, she whispered, "Thank you for making me feel like I belong." He turned his head and replied softly, "You always did, little star."